We'll have the panel come up after Chris starts it off. Or choose to have a seat now. Okay. Thank you all for coming. We have a jam-packed schedule today. Start off will be Chris Monteith, the Acting Bureau Chief, Consumer Government Affairs Bureau, who is putting on this panel. It's good stuff. Enjoy.
Thank you, Roger. As Roger said, I'm Chris Monteith. I'm Acting Chief of the FCC's Consumer and Governmental Affairs Bureau. It's great to see so many folks here. It's great to see some familiar faces and great to have an opportunity to meet new folks. Today we're here to talk about two of the most important issues facing consumers, bill shock and cramming. Before I get into the specifics, I do want to thank all of our panelists for joining us to share their expert perspectives and to the consumers who are here as well. And I want to thank CTIA and the wireless carriers for their efforts to stem bill shock. We'll be hearing a lot about that over the course of the morning. To give you a brief history of bill shock and cramming, both how the issues came to our attention and what the Commission has done to address them, let me start there. First, with bill shock, the Commission did a study in 2011, as did Consumers Union around the same time. The results were frankly somewhat troubling. As the Commission reported then, roughly 1 in 6 subscribers had experienced bill shock, which is a sudden, unexpected increase in your wireless bill. Bill shock can hit consumers hard. The Commission has reported that 2/3 of its complaints show that consumers that have been hit with bill shock have encountered overages in the hundreds of dollars and in some cases even in the thousands of dollars. We also know that our other topic today, cramming, is a widespread issue. For those of you who don't know, cramming happens when consumers are charged on their landline or their mobile phone bill for services or products that they didn't authorize. And what we've learned is that these unauthorized charges are usually the result of a third party, someone other than the phone carrier, billing for a service that you may not normally associate with phone service. A 2011 Senate Commerce Committee staff report estimated that third-party billing, the source of most cramming, is a $2 billion a year practice involving approximately 300 million third-party charges on consumers' bills. A cramming unlike bill shock can be hard to detect. Most of the time, cram charges will not shock. They can be as low as 99 cents or even $1.99. These aren't amounts that are going to stand out on a consumer's bill most of the time, but they add up over time. And even when they don't cost us a lot individually, they cost us a lot collectively. The good news is that the Commission has taken strong action to help consumers avoid both bill shock and cramming as part of Chairman Janikowski's consumer empowerment agenda. In 2011, the Commission proposed to require usage alerts to let consumers know before they approach their plan limits and then again when they hit them. And I'm happy to say that the wireless carriers stepped up after our proposal and as of yesterday voluntarily providing usage alerts for voice, text, data, and international roaming. We're going to hear from them today about these alerts and other tools consumers can use to monitor their usage and avoid bill shock. And last spring, the Commission adopted rules to help landline consumers better detect and prevent cramming. Consumers can now better identify third-party charges on their bills and better hone in on possible cramming. And landline carriers that offer to block third-party charges now have to clearly and conspicuously disclose that option to consumers. The Commission found that cramming has historically been a bigger problem for landline than mobile, but it noted that it's becoming an increasing problem for mobile as well. And the Commission asked if we should take steps to protect mobile consumers. Now, just as with bill shock, the industry has taken voluntary steps to prevent cramming. For example, some of the largest landline carriers have curtailed most third-party billing altogether. And we know that wireless carriers have established safeguards to protect consumers as well. With all of that as a prologue, we're here today to provide some hands-on explanations for consumers to help them understand just exactly what bill shock and cramming are and how they can make sure that they don't fall victim, or if they do, how to fix it. We're excited to be joined by some of the top consumer advocates, state regulators, and carrier representatives to provide what I'm sure is going to be a great program. And because we are still thinking about cramming and whether the Commission should do more in that area, we'll also have a discussion among industry experts about what's being done beyond our new rules to stop cramming and whether we should be doing more. In terms of schedule and logistics, we'll start with bill shock, including defining the problem, walking through the carrier's voluntary code to protect consumers from it, and then continue with a panel discussion on what consumers can do to protect themselves. We'll then take a short break and return for the cramming portion of today's program. We'll start by defining cramming and describing the FCC's rules to protect consumers from it. We'll then have a panel discussion on how it occurs, what consumers can do to protect themselves, and industry efforts to prevent it. Then following another short break, we'll have a second cramming panel to focus on the issue of cramming on wireless phones. For those in the audience who would like to ask a question of our panelists or the FCC, we have cards on which you may write down your question, and we'll happily attempt to answer it. Another logistical note, because there is an open proceeding on cramming, the transcript of today's program will be put into our record. We also are webcasting, so we have a number of folks that are participating via the web. We're excited to be hosting this event, and we welcome consumers' questions and input. Everything ultimately the Commission does is for and on behalf of consumers. With that, I'll turn it over to Michael Karowitz, Acting Deputy Chief of our Consumer and Governmental Affairs, and Michael's going to lead the discussion on bill shock. And I invite our panelists to come.
Good morning, everybody. We'd like to start, as Chris said, by talking about bill shock. Bill shock is a term that we hear quite frequently these days, and I wanted to take a moment to define it. Bill shock is what occurs when a wireless subscriber experiences a sudden, unexpected increase in their monthly bill. And that's something that was not caused by an intentional change that was made to their service plan. Some of the most common examples for this increase are when subscribers are charged for unknowingly exceeding their plan's limits for voice or text and or data, or they incur unexpected international roaming charges. We get a lot of complaints about this, and people get quite upset, and I think they're upset because they're surprised. This was something that they weren't expecting to see. In the bill shock notice of proposed rulemaking, the FCC indicated that consumers are entitled to baseline information that allows them to control the costs they incur for mobile services. As Chris Monteith noted, in 2011, the Commission reported that one in six subscribers had experienced bill shock, and the Commission released a white paper on complaints received by the Commission related to mobile bill shock. And these complaints showed that bill shock can have a high financial cost. Of the consumers who complained to the FCC about this issue in the first half of 2010, 67% complained about bill shock amounts of $100 or more, and 20% had complaints of $1,000 or more. And those are pretty big dollar amounts. A consumer that wrote into us, contacted us, experienced bill shock upon returning from a 10-day trip to South Africa. There was a charge of $4,000 on his wireless service account, and the provider confirmed that the charges were for roaming. The consumer states that he kept the roaming function off at all times during the trip. So somewhere in there's a disconnect, and the consumer is walking away angry. Prior to her daughter's international travel, another consumer called the provider and to determine what plan would best meet her daughter's usage. The consumer, despite selecting a plan and arranging for a prepaid phone in the visiting country for daily use, the consumer experienced bill shock when she received a $10,000 bill for roaming charges, and the consumer stated that she was not advised by the carrier that the phone needed to be turned off during the trip. Another consumer, same theme, is purchase an international travel plan from her provider for $1,500. That's what she was willing to spend up front so that her daughter could use a phone during a 3-week trip to Panama. And she was shocked when she received a bill for $7,000 in roaming charges. So these examples, which involve big dollar amounts, are all international in orientation, but we do hear about domestic bill shock as well. So it's a problem that all of us need to pay attention to, whether we're calling domestically or traveling internationally. What I'd like to do at this juncture is to move to the Voluntary Industrial Code that CTIA, the Wireless Association, has been at the forefront of. This is something that I'm joined by Chris Gutman-McCabe from CTIA, and he's going to give us some details about the industry response, what carriers have done to help consumers out. And by way of introduction, the CTIA revised its voluntary code back in October of 2011, and it provides that at no charge to the consumer, signatory carriers are now providing consumers, and I might add, without any action necessary by the consumer, either voice or text alerts to notify customers when they approach and reach monthly plan limits for voice, text, and or data services that would result in overage charges. This also includes sending alerts to consumers who are about to incur international roaming charges that are not covered by their monthly plans. The carriers clearly disclose any tools that they offer to enable customers to set their own usage limits and monitor their usage balances. All the carriers satisfied the requirement to provide their subscribers with 2 of the 4 types of alerts. That would be voice, text, data, and international roaming by October 2012. And carriers are providing all alerts by today, April 17th, 2013. And with that, let me give it over to Chris.
Thank you, Michael, and thank you, Chris and Mark Stone as well for having us here. I think I guess I would start by saying that a voluntary commitment on behalf of the wireless industry and the wireless carriers that are members of CTI is not extraordinarily unique. If you've been at CTI for 11 years, and if you go back those 11 years, I think I started pretty much the day that we were implementing our consumer code. And when you move from there, I actually testified on the emergency alert effort shortly after that, and we implemented voluntary emergency alerts. We worked through issues involving our consumer checklist several years back. Obviously, Michael, this issue, our usage alerts. More recently, we've worked with the Commission on stolen cell phones and on text to 911. So we've had a history as an industry of really trying to step up and voluntarily provide solutions to consumer and public safety concerns. I think what is unique about this issue is we don't often get to stand up and at the end of the process when everyone's hit the target and say, yay, we actually hit our target, we've delivered. More often than not, it silently comes to pass, and a lot of times our CEOs look at us and say, well, gosh, we did it, what happens now? And I said, well, you pat yourselves in the back and we move on. So here we are today. We're celebrating the fact that all of the carriers that made the commitment for usage alerts have hit those targets. As Michael said, it was in October of 2011 that we made the initial commitment that we would have 2 of 4 different types of alerts in place by October 2012, and all 4 in place by April of 2013, actually today. And those alerts, as Chris had mentioned and Michael had mentioned, were for voice, when a consumer would approach or exceed, or after they exceed, if they were to exceed, their voice limits, their data limits, their text limits, as well as an alert when a consumer would travel internationally that they were going to be roaming. So I'm happy to say that we hit the 2, and in fact, in October of last year, most of the carriers had exceeded that and beaten that deadline. And then here we are today. We are happy to say that all the carriers that represent over 97% of subscribers in the United States, have hit their targets. And I don't want to steal any thunder, but each of the carriers did it in a way that they believe will help educate their consumers. I know personally I've traveled abroad a number of times in the last year, and I've received the international alerts as I've landed, and each time I attempted to download something or attempted to use a data service, I additionally received alerts. So I think it would be quite impossible. In fact, my daughter recently at spring break, we were in the Caribbean. My daughter kept bringing me her phone, saying, "What does this mean? Does this mean am I going to incur a charge?" I said, "No, you actually reacted and turned off your data roaming, and so you're fine. We can use Wi-Fi." And so I think it's having a positive effect. We haven't seen any consumer complaints reported by the Commission in this space since the alerts have been initiated, and so I think that's a positive outcome of what we did, and we're excited to see that. And so as I said, I'm happy to say that we're here to say that the industry as a whole, all of the carriers that made the commitment in October of 2011 have hit their targets and have the alerts up and running and are providing them to consumers.
That's very good news, and thank you for sharing that with us. The industry is there to do its part to make tools available to consumers, people that are using these services. And we're going to talk a little bit further in a couple moments about this with representatives from the carriers. But I did want to point out that tools are all well and good, but we have to sort of avail ourselves of them. And I do have some tips that I would like to pass on to consumers. These are tips that the FCC, in its familiarity with calling, recommends. They've been discussed previously with the carriers. The carriers very much are on board with these tips too. The first one is simply to understand your calling pattern for using wireless services. Everyone, including me, need to stop and think about how I use a wireless phone, how often. Am I likely in some circumstances to use it more, in other circumstances less? I need to know that when I pick the right sort of plan. I have had plans on my wireless cell phone that I have changed because I ran into issues where my charges for a month were much bigger than I expected. So that happens. And then to understand what the options are, what's available to you from your carrier for data and text plans, as well as voice. Sometimes people, perhaps some of our younger users, rely on text and data much more than voice. And so make sure you pay attention to the specifics of what every plan offers. Talk to your carrier about a plan that best suits your monthly data and text usage patterns. They'll guide you. It's in their interest to keep you on board as a happy customer. Consider a prepaid plan if you are an infrequent phone user and want to make it impossible to go over your set limit. Take a moment to understand roaming charges and where you may incur them. I still run across people that don't understand roaming charges. And that's something that we all, should be up to speed on. Consider unlimited plans if you're constantly exceeding your plan allowance. There may be more of a charge for an unlimited plan, but if you are regularly hitting overage charges, you might actually be saving. If you plan to use your phone outside of the United States, make certain to find out beforehand what charges may apply for voice and data services. You'll note that in some of the examples I gave you, there was discrepancies about what was going on with roaming. This would be a good thing to nail down with your carrier before you depart. That's why the carriers have customer service people waiting to guide you through any of those questions. Ask your carrier just generally for help in avoiding bill shock. This can be with phone and text alerts that let you monitor your account online or provide you with other information. My experience is the carriers are doing a good job of making these tools available, but if for some reason you can't find them or you have a follow-up question, contact your carrier, and you can always contact the FCC as well. Thank you.
And Michael, one thing I would add is, and you hit on it at the end there, all of the carriers offer tools that allow you, in the middle, beginning, end of the month, to get a sense of where you are with regard to your plan. For most of them, it's some version of pound or star and followed by a 3-digit number. There are also tools in most of the application stores that are free and easy to download that allow you to track your usage. So you can get a sense of where you are within a month by using these tools or contacting the carriers' networks through the pound and star systems. And those are in place. We've moved them forward so folks can find them easily and use them to manage and maintain an account that keeps them happy, as you said.
Thank you. I think we are ready to start the panel, the discussion, where we can get into a little bit more detail on questions people might have. And I want to point out once again that anyone in the audience who has a question, feel free to fill out an index card. There will be people around who will be bringing around cards. We'll try to get to as many of the questions as we can in this time, feeding them to the panel. You can note whether your question is for the panel in general or whether it's for a specific participant. I think what we'll do to start is why don't we go down the line and have each person take about 3 minutes. You can introduce yourself, give us sort of what your thoughts are on bill shock, what your carrier has done, and then we'll take questions after that. So let's start with Dave Charles, who is Director of Legal Affairs at T-Mobile.
Thank you, Michael. Good morning. My name is David Charles. I'm a Director of Legal Affairs in T-Mobile's Bellevue offices, and in that capacity, I'm responsible for providing advice and guidance to our consumer-facing business units. I advise on a broad range of consumer protection issues that arise during product design, product formation, and ultimately product support. As a subject matter expert, I work closely with T-Mobile's Government Affairs Group, CTIA, and the FCC on the development of the voluntary initiative for usage alerts, and was responsible for T-Mobile's rollout of usage alerts. I think the voluntary agreement is between the wireless industry and the FCC, providing consumers with usage alerts, is an example of an extremely successful public-private partnership that benefits consumers. T-Mobile has worked diligently to implement the technical changes necessary to deliver usage alerts, and I'm pleased to report that we've been delivering all 4 usage alert types: voice, messaging, data, and international roaming since November of last year. I'd like to thank the FCC for its leadership efforts to educate consumers and to rally industry behind a workable set of solutions. And on behalf of T-Mobile, I appreciate the opportunity to participate today, and I look forward to this discussion. Thank you.
Thank you. Our next panelist is Kimberly Darren, who is Director of Public Policy at AT&T Services.
Yes, my name is Kimberly Darren, and I am responsible for public policy, generally consumer issues, and I'm based in Redmond, Washington. I echo Dave's comments. We really appreciate this public-private partnership and think this is really successful and a benefit to our customers. We said it in our comments, but I think it bears repeating. Billing surprises are bad for business. They upset customers, they threaten their loyalty, and in a very competitive wireless industry, it's in our best interest to make sure that customers have information that they need, the resources and the tools to help prevent bill shock. To that end, we have a number of tools in place. We've actually been investing in and updating them for more than a decade. I know Chris mentioned what we call our STAR services, where you can use your device to request your remaining minutes, messages, and data usage sent to your cell phone via text message. We also have an IVR that customers can call and obtain their usage information. We have an online account management system called MyATT, where customers can go in and actually compare historical usage as well as current usage. And we also offer a MyATT app that some of our smartphone customers can access and track usage on the go. But really, our wireless usage alerts are obviously the focus of today's partnership, and I think we were cognizant of what exactly the FCC was looking for us to do, and in working with CTI, I think the carriers wanted to make sure that we struck a balance, and that is we wanted to provide information to customers that was going to be valuable at a frequency that wasn't going to annoy them and in a manner that wasn't going to confuse them. And so to that end, we've done a pretty good job. I think we've been pretty successful. As we've implemented them, we have a couple different things that I just wanted to cover. On voice alerts, we obviously have, as folks mentioned, we've implemented those. And our pre-overage alerts, because AT&T allows customers to roll over their unused minutes until they need them, we include the customer's rollover balance in that pre-overage alert. We also implemented in 2008 usage alerts for customers who are on our capped messaging and data plans. So even though it's not part of the CTIA consumer code, we went ahead and did that back in 2008. We've added a pre-overage alert so that those customers, those messaging and data customers who have a capped plan, we advise them in advance, and then after they incur approximately $20 in charges. And we also notify customers who are using messaging and data services on a pay-per-use basis. They obviously don't have a plan, so we don't need to alert them prior to, but when they start to incur charges, we alert them as well. And then for our tiered data plans, obviously data is a little bit more difficult for consumers to calculate and track as minutes and messages are. So we have a little bit more robust alerts in place, and we advise our customers both on our individual and mobile share plans. We alert them at 65, 90, and 100%, and then if additional data is added to their account to coverage any overage, we advise them at 75 and 100%. And we provide those alerts via SMS and email if we have a customer's valid email address on file. And on our mobile share alerts, we alert the customer and the primary account holder who is responsible for the bill.
Thank you very, very much. Our next panelist is Dilara Darakshani, who is the Policy Counsel at the Consumers Union.
Thank you. I'm very pleased to be here today on behalf of Consumers Union, the policy and advocacy arm of Consumer Reports magazine. Wireless bill shock has been a serious problem for millions of consumers. For years, we've heard horror stories of wireless customers who are hit with hundreds, even thousands of dollars worth of surprise charges on their monthly bills. Usually people had gone over their plan's limits for data, text, voice, or they'd been hit with international roaming charges. The underlying problem was that many customers weren't getting the tools that they needed to keep track of their plan's limits. The tools could be very poor depending on the particular carrier or how much one paid for their service. In 2010, Consumer Reports surveyed more than 58,000 people. We found that 1 out of 5 consumers had experienced cell phone bill shock over the prior year. That same year, we presented our findings at the FCC at a forum right here in Washington, where Chairman Janikowski really put the spotlight on the problem, and we heard real stories from people who had experienced such bill shock. The next year, we surveyed consumers again, and the findings were similar to the previous year. Ultimately, we supported the agreement announced in October 2011 by the FCC and carriers, whereby the carriers would voluntarily send free alerts to their customers before they went over their limits. We're very glad to have been part of the consumer education and advocacy process that got us here. On that point, I should note that our website, consumerreports.org, has a page devoted to bill shock with reports on companies' compliance as reported by the FCC, in addition to consumer advice. And we'll continue to be part of the process to make sure that this agreement works as promised, including for consumers who are especially vulnerable to bill shocks, such as lower-income communities and communities of color. So today we're very pleased to hear that all participating companies are reporting that they're in full compliance with the agreement. We plan to stay vigilant. We are going to keep monitoring how carriers are doing, and we're going to keep asking consumers how they believe that carriers are doing. So after many years of complaints from consumers, we think we've made some real progress. More people are getting the tools that they need to avoid bill shock, and we think that's a really good thing. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Our next panelist is Jerry Karnick, who is the Staff Vice President and Deputy General Counsel at the Verizon Wireless.
Thank you. Thank you, Michael. At Verizon Wireless, we've always understood the importance to our customers of understanding not just the benefits and the value of their wireless service, but also the cost. And so when the FCC and CTIA, we welcome the opportunity to work together with the FCC and CTIA and our fellow industry participants in forming the usage alerts guidelines that we're here talking about today. But even before that, Verizon Wireless has had easy tools to allow our customers to easily monitor their usage to avoid bill shock. In addition to usage alerts, outbound proactive usage alerts, similar to the ones that are part of the code, we also have, as Chris mentioned, our pound numbers, pound MIN, pound min, so customers can easily, right from their handset, find out the minutes and texts that they've used within a month, pound data, so they can find out their data usage, and when they dial out of those, we tell them orally over the phone what their usage is and when their allowance is reset, as well as we send a free text message. Thank you. In addition to that, we have our online tool, My Verizon, our online account management tool. We have a visual usage meter where a customer can easily see where they are in their allowance each month and when that allowance resets at the end of the month. On top of that, we allow customers, if they're tending towards an overage situation, to contact us at any time and to change their plan to one that's more appropriate for their usage. And we allow that without charge, without any contract extension, and we also allow the customers to make that plan change retroactive to the beginning of the bill cycle so that they never experience the overage charges in the first place. On the international side, not only do we send those alerts to let a customer know, hey, your phone is now registered in a foreign location, you may incur global roaming charges, but we also provide the toll-free number back to Verizon Wireless so a customer can call and make a change to their plan. We provide the voice and data rates that will apply in the country that the customer's in, so the customer knows what the charges will be. We also set our phones so that the default is for data roaming to be off globally, so that a customer doesn't, if they ignore that message, they're not going to get hit with those global data roaming charges. And then even if they've turned global data roaming on, for our consumer customers, we send them alerts as they hit various dollar thresholds in global data roaming charges so that they realize where those expenses are at. These are all tools that we feel are, as was mentioned, that customers, we want customers to appreciate the value of the services that we provide during the month, but we don't want them to be surprised by the bill that they get at the end of the month. And it's with these tools that we've had, it's one of the reasons why we believe that our customer retention has been industry leading quarter after quarter, year after year, because we've seen the value to our customers, making sure that we have well-educated customers who understand the services they get and what they're going to pay for those services. Thanks.
Thank you very much. Hi, Marty. We absolutely need your perspective. Marty Donahue is the Senior Legislative Representative at the Financial and Security and Consumer Affairs team of AARP.
Thank you. Thank you, and good morning. Get this a little closer. Hi, I'm Marty, AARP. Thank you very much for convening this workshop. It's nice to catch up after 2 years and see where consumers have been able to make significant gains regarding bill shock abuses. Excuse me, please. Founded in 1958, AARP is a nonprofit, nonpartisan membership organization that helps people over age 50 improve the quality of their lives. We were very pleased to participate in the docket empowering consumers to avoid bill shock back in 2011. In our summary for our comments, we asked the following things: that the FCC approve measures that would provide advanced notification of unexpected changes and reduce and avoid cell phone bill shock. Some of the points that we emphasized regarded notification via voice or text alerts whenever a wireless customer approached and or reached their monthly limit, as well as to a pre-designated main line for their plan. Check. Thank you. Notification when a customer is about to get hit with roaming charges while traveling, as well to a pre-designated main line for the plan. Check. Thank you for the progress. Better disclosure by service providers of the tools that are available for managing a wireless account, such as online resources or smartphone apps. Getting better. Thank you. Allowing consumers to cap their usage, thus preventing additional cost. Check. Much better. Allowing consumers to cancel without penalty any contract for wireless telephone service within a period of at least 20 days after the date of the first bill for monthly service following service activation. Check. Much progress. My time is very limited and it's slipping away very quickly, so I hope to be able to answer some questions from the audience about how the 50-plus population is being affected by bill shock and continues to be with the newest and latest, the tablets. And I think there's much work to be done there. And also remembering that many of our members are 50 and over, but those in the 65-plus age group, many of their phones come from their children, and so they don't get the designated information and consumer education that comes from going into a store if it's a gift. So hopefully we can work together on that.
Thank you very, very much. Charles McKee is our next panelist. He's the Vice President of Government Affairs, Federal and State Regulatory at Sprint Nextel Corporation.
Thanks very much for the opportunity to talk to you today. I'm Charles McKee with Sprint Nextel. Pleased to be here. I'm happy that we're able to be together to talk about a success within the industry. From Sprint's perspective, we've had a hard look at this issue, and I'll echo what other carriers have said, and that is no carrier wants to annoy their customer. No carrier wants their customers to be mad at them and surprised by their bill. There was never a great conspiracy to try to do things to their customers. The goal is to have a happy customer. And when Dan Hesse took over Sprint, he made it his laser focus to improve our customer satisfaction. That was his number one priority. And he implemented a number of different ways to address that. And the first thing he did was introduction of unlimited plans, because he recognized that customers don't want to be surprised and that they actually value a plan that allows them to simply use their phone however they want to use it and not worry about what that bill is going to be at the end of the day. So a large percentage of our customers are on unlimited plans precisely because they value that. But we weren't satisfied with simply offering that plan. We also implemented a number of other procedures to ensure that customers were well informed and not surprised when they got their bills. We've implemented a number of the things that other carriers have talked about here. You can text star 1311 to get your usage information. You can dial star 4 and go through an IVR to get your usage information. You can have your usage information text to you. You can go to the website, and on mysprint.com, which is a page designed for you, you can pop up what your usage has been, how it measures against your plan. On the right-hand column, there will be alternative plans, and if you have an overage, there will be an alert, and it will tell you, are you sure you want this plan, or would you like to change to one of these alternative plans? And you can click on the alternative plan, and it will show you how your usage would measure against that plan. And if you want, you can switch to that plan. Again, as with Verizon, no charge, no penalty associated with that. We want you to be happy. Frankly, a lot of this has to do with getting the customer comfortable with their phones, making sure they understand what they're going to receive when they walk out the door, which again was another one of Dan's initiatives, what he calls Ready Now. We ensure that we sit down with our customers before they walk out the door, explain to them how their phone works, show them how to access information about their account, so that when they leave, they not only can use their phone, but they know what to expect when they get that first bill.
Thank you very much. I really appreciated the opportunity to hear each of you speak from your respective perspectives. And there's a number of words that kind of jump out in some of the things that you said. There's advocacy, solutions, progress, stepping up. I think that those words all describe the various roles that folks on this panel have played. And, you know, there's a lot of good that's happened, and I think that we absolutely deserve, you know, a round of congratulations. And we can talk about a lot of the steps the carriers have taken, which are very laudable. I also heard from one of the panelists that it was important to stay vigilant and keep monitoring, and I think that's what we're all willing to do, and please correct me if I'm wrong, but it seems like this is the beginning of an ongoing conversation between advocacy groups, the carriers, and consumers, as well as us here at the FCC, to make sure consumers' needs are responded to, and that people get what they pay for, aren't shocked by things that they're not paying for or don't intend to pay for. And I think we're well on our way, and I think this panel will point up the substantial progress that's been made. And so with that, what I'd like to do is throw out some questions, and again remind the audience that they have an opportunity to ask questions by submitting them on an index card and giving them to me, and I'll be happy to take those up. One of the experiences I've had in talking about bill shock with friends around town and also around the country when I'm on the phone is confusion about alerts and when they're sent. Are they, and I'm hoping that we can sort this out, are alerts sent before somebody has exceeded their plan? Are they sent just after the limit is reached? Or are they sent at some period after everything has finished up? Do they come later on? And it may be different alerts for different carriers. Anyone like to tackle that question for starters?
I think I possibly can. I mean, the alerts are sent under the guidelines as a customer approaches and then as a customer exceeds their allowance. So, and I think each of the carriers probably implements slightly differently. Verizon Wireless, for instance, for data, we send an alert when the customers hit 50%, 75%, 90%, and then 100% of their allowance. And then if they go into an overage bucket, when they hit 90% of that overage bucket. But the guidelines would say just at least one as they approach and then one as they exceed. So I think different carriers have probably experimented with what's the right approach. Exceed, actually, it's probably right at 100%. So probably everybody agrees on that. And we'll continue to experiment on that as we look and hear back from customers about, are they getting too many alerts? Are they not getting enough? Are they ignoring alerts because it's overload? To try to find that sweet spot. To make sure the customers are getting the information that they need when they need it at a time that they can take action regarding it.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, I think one of data is probably the area in which there's the greatest concern about usage and maybe the most difficulty in measuring it in your own mind. I think when you're talking on the phone, everyone's kind of used to thinking about how long they've been on the phone, but data can be a little bit more difficult to track. So we're doing 75%, 90%, 100%, and then if you go over every 20% over every time, so we continue to ping you as you move along to ensure that you understand where you are. And in fact, if you're on an international, which is where international roaming, of course, hopefully everyone understands that the charges associated with international roaming are primarily driven by the international carrier who is charging us for providing the service. And since those numbers can get big faster, we also have some safety stops. As you hit certain dollar amounts, we will first warn you, you're over by so much, you must affirm, we're going to freeze your service, and you must affirmatively say, yes, I really want to continue. And then at some point, if you hit a large enough overage, we'll stop service and require you to call us and say, yes, I understand, I really, really do want to continue to spend this much money in whatever foreign country I'm in.
Okay. Anybody else have anything to add?
And I think that really to Jerry's point, I think the code does a really great job of allowing carriers that flexibility to. We all have different, it sounds like, trigger percentages, especially on the data side, that allow us to kind of fine tune and hone that, as Jerry mentioned, and I think we really appreciate that flexibility.
Okay. One of the things I think that we all find in our life when we're transacting business and shopping is we have different expectations in different industry segments. We have people that will tell us that in the credit card industry they receive alerts real quickly the minute that their threshold is reached, or their credit limit rather. Do you have a sense, or can you help consumers understand how their expectations in maybe something like credit cards or on a completely different industry might be similar or different than this context of cell phone usage?
Well, we've said in previous advocacy documents and our publication Consumer Reports that we think it's good practice for consumers to review their bills as if they were reviewing a credit card statement.
Okay.
So be aware of what the charges are, that they match up with what you were told they were going to be, and that you understand where each of them came from. So we think that's good practice.
Okay.
I'll say from Sprint's perspective, we try to provide those alerts in real time.
Okay.
And as quickly as we possibly can. When you're on our network, we can do that pretty much real time most of the time. The only time where there can be some lag is if you're on another carrier's network roaming in a foreign country. If we don't have systems that are connected directly to that carrier, we can't provide you the same real time. But as quickly as we can, we'll measure and alert you as that usage comes to us.
And part of what we talked about in the discussions with the Commission and Consumers Union and AARP was, we understand it does make sense to alert a consumer in advance, and part of the reason for that is that you can get into a data session and it's not able to, you can't get stopped in the middle of the data session and get an alert. And so the idea was, we're going to give you an alert in advance, and from the consumer perspective, there has to be some ownership of the notion that we're close. And so as you've seen from each of these carriers, they've given a couple trigger points in advance of hitting that threshold in order to make sure that the consumer is aware. I don't see that in other areas of my life where I get, I don't get it in a water context, I don't get it in my electrical context, but in here, with a desire to make sure that the customer is happy and aware, you see multiple points along the way that say, you're getting close, you're closer, you're really close, you've just exceeded, you're sure you want to exceed, you can go back and change your plan. And so each of the carriers have attempted to find a way, and Kimberly said it, a way that alerts the consumer often enough but doesn't over-alert them. And we've talked about alerts in the context of, the car alarm syndrome, right? Does anyone pay attention when a car alarm goes off anymore? It's because it just happens so often that people no longer even turn and look at it. So we wanted to find that balance, and I know Kimberly talked about it. Each of the companies have talked about trying to find that balance.
Yeah, and I think that's helpful. We get questions about the accuracy of alerts as well, and I certainly understand that when you have multiple triggers, if it's not going to be precisely right one time, it might be right the next time. Is there some way that a customer has the ability to determine when he or she might receive an alert? I think the fear here that some folks have is that the alert might arrive at a time when they're not paying attention to their phone. Is there some way that they have any input into setting when that alert would be triggered?
For Verizon Wireless, right now we provide the alerts. We allow, by the way, I told you the percentages that we provide them on, but a customer can actually pick different percentages if they want at a different time. But our timing on the alerts, we don't currently have the ability for a customer to say, I don't want to receive alerts between midnight and 3 a.m., for instance. But an important thing to remember is that if we send them alerts by text message and then by email, if we have the email address, if I receive a text message at 2:30 in the night, we're providing those alerts real time or very near real time. So if it's coming at 2:30 in the night, it's probably because I'm using my phone at 2:30 in the middle of the night. The other one is that if I use my phone, put it down, the alert comes through 10 seconds later, the alert will be there the next morning when I get up before I start using the phone again. So it's not that, just like any other text message that somebody sends you in the middle of the night, when you get up in the morning, it's there, so the customer is seeing it usually the next time they're using their phone.
T-Mobile?
Yeah, and I would say that very similar in terms of we don't offer the ability for customers to customize the time, but we do allow them the ability to customize who on an account would receive a notification. So they can set up if a parent would like to receive notifications on usage of a child, they will receive that as the primary account holder, or even the children or the additional lines can be set to receive the notifications as well.
Good. That sounds very helpful. I'd like to remind those of you who are joining us via the web that you too have an opportunity to send questions to us and have them answered by this panel. Please send your questions to livequestions@fcc.gov. Once again, the email address is livequestions@fcc.gov. And we are getting plenty of questions here. How can consumers better determine their usage needs so they can choose a plan that meets their needs? I talked a little bit earlier in consumer tips about making sure that the consumers were doing their part to investigate the products that were available to them. Do you have any pointers for them?
I hate to hog the microphone, but we have some, and I'm assuming that the other carriers have something similar. But we have usage calculators on our website where a customer can go in, and rather than asking them how much data are you going to use this month, and as Charles said, that's the one that's the most difficult for customers to sort of grasp, right? I mean, people get a sense of how long am I on the phone making a phone call, how many messages am I sending or receiving. We have calculators for those as well, but we also ask the customer, how many emails do you send? How many web pages do you view? How many photos do you download? And then we've used our best estimate for, obviously every email can be slightly different, depending on the nature of the website. It can have different uses, but to try to give a customer a ballpark, they put in what they do. We'll then calculate as best we can an estimate of how much data that actually adds up to, whether it's I send 10 emails a day and I view YouTube for 15 minutes a day, or whether they want to do it on a monthly basis. And then we tell them this is how much data it's likely to add up to. Here's the plans that are available that may be appropriate for your usage.
And also, there is a great need for the FCC to step into this space as well in terms of more outreach and consumer education, utilizing the radio more, public interest programs, because very often consumers may say, well, that's just a telephone company talking and they just want more money, and there's a deaf ear turned. So I do think that there is a great opportunity for the FCC to do more outreach and education in this space and make it more of a community education awareness program in terms of helping consumers learn how to, or making them more aware of dialing into their usage, asking more questions, perhaps creating opportunities for the industry and the consumer to personalize those alerts. Very often consumers may get the alerts, but they don't know what it is. It's another sound coming from the phone. So particularly for our membership 65 and older, again, where many of the phones are often gifts from the children, that step from walking off the street into the store and getting the best possible market advice and education is not there because it comes in a box as a present. So I think there's a great opportunity for, say, the government, the FCC, to step into this space and do more in terms of public information.
And I should note that both Consumers Union and the other public interest and organizations and civil rights groups with whom we work have also expressed a lot of interest in helping out with those education efforts. So we look forward to working more with you on that issue as well.
Good, and some of this discussion anticipates a question from the audience, and this is, have the carriers been challenged by reaching out to senior and other underserved populations versus what the questioner terms more savvy consumers? If you face those challenges, how have you surmounted them? Anyone want to tackle that?
Ooh, silence.
Well, I'll say I had the privilege this year of receiving my first invitation to join the AARP. And so maybe I fall into that category now. I think what we're finding is that folks are becoming more savvy as they use these devices. And part of what we've tried to do, again, is assess to the consumer on an individual basis when they buy the device. What are you going to do? How are you going to use it? And then step them through the process before they leave when they first get the device. So we'll set up their email for them. We'll explain to them how to use it. We'll show them the tile on the smartphone, for example, that is the immediate access to mysprint.com, which will show their usage. So we'll show them all those things to try and get them comfortable with the use of their phone before they walk out the door. Again, the goal being to avoid surprises down the line. That's a difficult process, and everybody has different levels of understanding. I think that one of the things that the reality is that these phones, and kind of what we're talking about now, is that phones are not phones anymore, right? They're really mobile computers that are involved in everything that you do on a desktop. Only we're still thinking about them as if they were phones. So that's where the greater complications come in.
If I could add, one of the things that we've done as well is, in addition to setting up phones at the point of sale, but understanding what Marty, your point that oftentimes a phone, especially for a senior, somebody in the senior population, isn't necessarily a purchase they've made, but it's a gift that's been given to them. We have wireless workshops, either online or in our stores, that a customer can sign up, come into one of our stores in a non-pressure situation. It's not a sales situation at that point at all, and they're not in a rush to get out. But this is by their appointment to come in and learn how to use their phone, so that they've got the chance, they can actually feel it, touch it, have somebody sit down and walk them through it, and they're not thinking about the end of the transaction, okay, what do I need to sign, what's going on? It's just, here's how you use your phone. And that's a lot of the outreach that we've done, in addition to actually doing something as simple as we sent out phones to customers, but we sent it out with a video camera. We asked them to film themselves opening the box, and then their whole setup process. So not just what did they tell us was difficult for them, but we actually watched what was difficult for them. What did they not understand to get that phone set up out the door working for them? So there's lots of efforts. Those are just two examples of things that we're doing to try to meet our customers where they want to talk to us, as opposed to we talk to them, we say, well, we know it's good for you. Read this brochure, you'll understand everything.
So to use a phrase that my grandmother used to use, I think what you see is a belt and suspenders approach. You're seeing, carriers have education campaigns. You're seeing them have tools online, the Pound and the Star. You're seeing them put tools into their app stores. You're seeing them, have text-based alerts. Some of them have email-based alerts. Sometimes you get phone calls. And so I do think there is, really an effort to hit all the different constituencies. And if we're missing some, sir, we'd love to hear about it. If there are ways for us to help, populate some of the pages at AARP or Consumers Union with information from the carriers, I think we'd love to do that. It's an effort to educate the consumers, younger, older, less affluent, all of the above.
I think a good effort is being made to work with the customer when they walk in to determine why are they buying the phone, what is the purpose for their usage, what motivated them to come in. And so if industry can get to the point where once you determine that phone is going to be a gift, particularly to a person 65 and older, that perhaps they can attach a personalized invitation along with the gift. Great that your son, your daughter got you this phone, and here's an appointment set up just for you at our local store, because you have the ability to know exactly based on their address where your closest facility is or your closest shop, with a nice invitation to come in at a specific time or call and choose a time for an education session.
And Chris, your words are very encouraging, because as I mentioned in our introductory remarks, one of the issues that we are concerned about at Consumers Union is ensuring that all communities are understanding and making the most of these tools that you're providing them. So that sounds really great. Thank you.
Good. We do have folks that are watching us online, and some of them are with the various state regulatory commissions. And I have one question. Some carriers have signed the voluntary code, and others have said that they will conform to it. Some of those that say they will conform are often resellers. Is there any distinction there in that we should be aware of going forward?
Well, the only distinction that I'm aware of is there are a number of companies that aren't members of CTIA, and so when we initiated this process, it was our CTIA consumer code. We actually do have a number of companies that conform with it that aren't members, but within CTIA's membership, the number of people that participate is really significant, and again, it represents north of 97% of all consumers that have signed on. We know that there are others that are doing it that help to fill in that delta between the total number of consumers and the ones that have signed the consumer code.
Good, thank you. That's helpful. I know that this is new for some carriers, and some carriers have had a little bit more time to get alerts up and running. What kind of feedback are you hearing? Both what kind of feedback are the carriers hearing? Are the consumer advocates hearing about whether this is working, not working? Do you have any good news to pass on in that regard, or stories? Anybody? Any consumer feedback that would be helpful to know at this juncture?
The anecdotal feedback we've received so far is that consumers like the alerts. They like the frequency of the alerts. They find it to be important information. I mean, there's a small number who find them annoying, and so that's trying to find the sweet spot on there. I'd be very interested if any of the advocacy groups have heard the feedback, or if the FCC has, because that obviously that you may get. We may hear the good stuff. You guys may hear the bad stuff, and so we'd love to hear that as well.
Well, once again, the alerts, an alert for one customer may be just another noise to another customer. So I think that there is work to be done in terms of underserved communities, disadvantaged communities, minority communities, and the 65 and over group in terms of what these alerts mean. And but by far, consumers have expressed positive feelings about getting the alerts. But again, based on age, based on income and community, they can mean different things.
We actually agree. As I mentioned earlier, we believe that we've made some real progress in this area, noticeably so, as more people are getting the tools that they need. That being said, this isn't the end of the process, and we are going to continue to keep an eye out on this issue. So.
Good, thank you. It's great to get everyone together, folks from the industry who are sometimes competitors working together, consumer advocates who have one perspective, and those who are delivering a service who sometimes have a differing perspective. We have managed to get everyone together on these issues and make, I think what everyone agrees is a substantial amount of progress, and so I thank you for that, congratulate you on your efforts, and move now to wrap up the panel.
Thank you.
5-minute break, and will panel 2 please come up?
Thank you so much.
Okay. Panel 2. Cramming panel. Thanks. Okay.
Hi, everybody. Thanks for being here today, and kind of shift gears now from Bill Shock over to Cramming. Thanks to all the panelists for being here. I'm Mark Stone. I'm a Deputy Chief in the Consumer and Governmental Affairs Bureau. We have a good program on cramming, we think, for you, that hopefully will answer what consumers need to know to protect themselves from cramming. We'll also have a discussion focused on wireless cramming specifically in our second panel and what makes wireless cramming unique from landline. We have a terrific group of panelists here representing industry, consumer advocates, and state and federal regulatory interests. So we'll start off with some nuts and bolts cramming 101. We'll define cramming, briefly explain the FCC's current rules, and then move to a discussion on how it occurs and how consumers can protect themselves. Then we'll have, as I mentioned, a second panel that's focused mostly on wireless cramming, the scope of that issue, what makes it distinct from landline cramming, solutions carriers have already put into place, and then where we go from here. So, just to start off, I want to briefly define and give you some sense of how cramming works, what it is, and then the FCC's requirements. If I can get the PowerPoint to work here. There we go. So I hope this is easy to read and not too dazzling a PowerPoint presentation for you. Cramming is fairly easy to define, actually. It's simply the placement of unauthorized charges on consumer telephone bills. As I mentioned, it can be either landline or wireless. It most often originates, based on what we've found here and studies by others, from what we call third-party billers, which is to say, not the carrier itself. So the carrier is doing the billing and giving the consumer the bill on which the cram charge is placed, but that charge does not originate most often with the carrier. So those third-party billers will charge for the services or products that may or may not be related to phone service. As many of you may know, cramming can be a one-off problem. It might happen once a month, or it might be recurring. Usually, when we see monthly charges where the cram is happening month by month, it can be often low, maybe 99 cents, $1.99, but in the aggregate, that can add up. So moving now to what the FCC's requirements are to prevent cramming or help consumers detect it. These rules basically break out into two different types. There's a set of rules that currently apply to both landline and wireless, and then there's a set of rules that apply just for wireless. So briefly, those that apply to both landline and wireless. Number one, carriers must provide the name of the service provider associated with each charge clearly and conspicuously on the phone bills. Number two, phone bills must clearly and conspicuously identify any charge and service provider, including identification of charges from any new service provider. And then number three, phone bill charges must be accompanied by a brief, clear, non-misleading, plain language description of the service or services rendered. So the second set of Commission rules that the Commission just adopted back in April of last year, these apply just to landline carriers. Number one, where charges of two or more carriers appear on the same phone bill, the charges must be separated by service provider. Number two, carriers that place on bills charges from third parties for non-telecommunication services, and that's a key point, must place those charges in a distinct section of the bill separate from all carrier charges and separately subtotaled. So that distinction between third-party charges for telecommunications versus non-telecommunication services is key. The notion being that if it is actually a telecommunication service, it's more closely aligned with the the phone service the consumer's expecting and may be less likely to be susceptible to cramming. Not always, but maybe less likely, and that's why the Commission drew this distinction in that rule. And then third, carriers that offer subscribers the option to block third-party charges from appearing on phone bills must clearly and conspicuously notify subscribers of this option at the point of sale, on each phone bill, and on carrier websites. An important note is that the Commission did not require that carriers offer to block all third-party charges, but it said if that capability already exists with the carrier, that they've got to let consumers know that up front so consumers can avail themselves of that. So with that is our baseline. Wanted to talk now to our panelists that we have here. Again, the first panel will give this set of panelists a chance to talk about what consumers can do to protect themselves from cramming, industry efforts to combat cramming. We'll also discuss how cramming occurs because of the relationship between the carrier and then what's called a billing aggregator, and then the content or service provider that initiated the charge, and then ultimately the consumer. It's not as straightforward a set of relationships as you might think. So digging in a little bit to that set of relationships, what takes place, and where the points are to safeguard consumers against cramming. We'll get into some of that. So again, the second panel later this morning will focus on cramming issues unique to wireless. So this panel may get into a little bit of wireless issues as well, but the focus will be primarily landline. So with that in mind, I'd like to turn it over to our panelists to introduce themselves. And also being cognizant of the time, we've got a very large time reminder in front of us. So I ask everyone to try to keep an eye on that as best you can. So I'm just going to go right down the line, moving from me and away from me, to ask the panelists to introduce themselves. And again, very grateful that you're here to talk to us. So first, Corlette Hannon from the AARP.
Good morning, everyone, and thank you. My name is Corlette Hannon. I'm a senior legislative representative with AARP's Government Affairs Department, specifically working in the State Advocacy and Strategy Integration Group. AARP, as most of you know, is a nonprofit, nonpartisan organization with a membership of about 37 million people. We endeavor to strengthen communities and to fight for issues that mean a lot to families, including pocketbook issues like affordable utilities. We have state offices in all 50 states, the U.S. Virgin Islands, Puerto Rico, and D.C. I'm sorry. Telephone communications are an important part of life for older Americans. It provides a basic necessity that allows them to maintain contact with their communities, to reach services related to health and safety, and to also access emergency services as they are needed. Our research has found that folks who are 65 years of age and older are more likely than any other age group to have landline telephone service in their home. So that's a reason why AARP is so concerned about the issue of cramming and other deceptive practices that the telecom industry may engage in. And we found that cramming consists of possibly two approaches. One is charges on someone's bill that are unclear, that are very vague. For instance, a charge that may just simply say it's a monthly fee or some other type of fee. And so that's something that we're concerned about, this unclear description of the charge that's actually being placed on a bill. Another issue is obviously folks being charged for services that they do not want and have not authorized. So AARP has about 4 policy positions that we have on this area that we fought for in the states and at the federal level. One is the enforcement of existing laws and regulations. Number 2 is requiring complete, clear, and truthful descriptions of services on bills, and that includes clearly identifying the service provider that has authorized or has placed that charge on the bill. 3 is imposing substantial penalties on those who engage in cramming practices. And the 4th would be ensuring that consumers not only do not have to pay for services and charges that they did not authorize, but also that they are fully refunded for those unwanted services and charges that appear on their bill. So thank you, and I will enjoy engaging in this conversation this morning.
Great. And you had 15 seconds left, so much appreciated. Next, Malini Mithal.
Good morning. I'm Malini Mithal with the Federal Trade Commission. I'm in the Division of Financial Practices. I'm an assistant director. And the Federal Trade Commission brings a wide variety of enforcement actions. We have brought a number of actions in the landline cramming context, dozens of actions, to halt cramming practices and provide tens of millions of dollars of redress to consumers who are victimized by crammer practices. We have also actually just yesterday filed a mobile cramming action, our first mobile cramming action. It's against a company named Wise Media. And Wise Media crammed unauthorized charges on people's cell phone bills for purported services relating to dating tips and horoscopes. These were services that many people had not authorized. They had never even heard of the company before they were hit with charges. And in many instances, consumers didn't even receive the purported services that were being provided. I'll talk more about that case in response to some of Mark's questions. In addition to our enforcement work, we also conduct policy work related to mobile cramming and cramming in general. For example, the Division of Financial Practices recently hosted a mobile payments workshop, and just last month we came out with our workshop report in which we reiterated comments we made to the FCC last year regarding mobile cramming. Specifically, we advocated for carriers offering consumers the option to block all third-party charges, and we made other recommendations as well that I'll talk about as in response to some of Mark's questions. We're also examining what additional protections are needed in this area. Along with the FCC, we are very concerned about this issue, and we are hosting our own workshop on May 8th to further discuss the problems and solutions in the cramming area.
Terrific, thanks. Next, Chris Paulin from Dimension Data.
Thanks, Mark. Hi, my name is Chris Paulin, and I'm with Dimension Data. We are a telecommunications expense management company based in Centerville, Virginia. And I want to thank you for holding this workshop to discuss this important issue of cramming. At Dimension Data, we manage approximately $1 billion per year in telecommunications spend for our corporate and government clients. So we're monitoring their telecom invoices every month. And because of this, we have a unique view into the world of telecommunications services and billing. And the cramming, or unauthorized charges by communications carriers on behalf of third parties, has been a huge problem, and it remains a problem for the industry. Good news is that in the first quarter of 2013, we've actually seen a steep decrease in the amount of third-party charges on telephone bills. Nearly 60% decline in the number of crams versus the same period a year ago. And I look forward to discussing this topic in more detail as we continue with the panel. Thank you.
Thanks. Next, Glenn Reynolds with U.S. Telecom representing landline carriers.
Thanks, Mark. For those of you not familiar with U.S. Telecom, we are the trade association for the traditional telephone companies. These include the largest telephone companies, Verizon, AT&T, what some refer to as mid-sized companies, and a large number of very small companies that typically provide service in more rural areas of the country. I'd like to start by expressing our appreciation to the FTC, Senator Rockefeller's office, as well as a number of the state attorneys general for shining a light on this issue over the past couple of years. It was about exactly 2 years ago that I appeared on a very similar panel at the Federal Trade Commission, which coincided with several very aggressive enforcement actions that the FTC was taking at that point. At the same time, the FCC initiated your most recent rulemaking in this area that, once again, I think focused consumers' attention and improved, frankly, also focused the attention of the industry on this issue. As a result of this concerted focus, the cooperative work, I think, between the industry and the government, the number of cramming inquiries that the FCC has received has dropped dramatically since between early 2010 and the third quarter of 2012, the FCC's informal inquiries regarding cramming dropped 90%, which is a major improvement, and I think reflects a number of the actions that both the FCC, FTC, and other enforcement agencies have taken in this area, which might lead one to sort of question whether there's a reason for being here. But I do think that there is these types of forum serve a very valuable purpose, because what we've learned over time is that these types of frauds tend to go away when folks focus on them, when the industry is focused on them, when the government is focused on them. But once you lose that focus, they sometimes come back in some mutated form. And that's a lesson that's not only true for consumers to remain vigilant, but it's also a lesson for the companies to remain vigilant with respect to what's going on in their bill. I want to emphasize, I think all of our companies have a common interest with their customers and making sure that their customers are not subject to fraud. We can't afford to be losing these customers based on improper charges appearing on these bills. And so, as we can discuss a little in more detail later, the companies have made a number of changes in their practices over the last couple of years that I think are in no small part responsible for this improvement. So thanks again for having us. And
thanks, Glenn. Next, Dilara Darakshani from Consumers Union.
Yes, thank you. I'm delighted to be here on behalf of Consumers Union, the policy and advocacy arm of Consumer Reports magazine. Our organization has been focused on the issue of abusive cramming of third-party charges onto phone bills since it first emerged as a concern shortly after the '96 Telecom Act. Over the years, our magazine and our online subscribers have told us about third-party fees appearing on their landline and wireless bills. Significantly, these fees can be hard to detect. Crammers often avoid detection by charging small amounts or describing charges in a way that makes them sound legitimate. As a result, Consumers Reports has repeatedly warned consumers about cramming and has advised them on how best to protect themselves against these abuses. 1, study your bill closely. 2, proactively tell your carrier to block all third-party charges on your account if they offer the option. And 3, if you find unauthorized charges, call your carrier and demand a refund. But our organization did not stop with advice to consumers. We pressed the agency to move forward to prevent these abuses and submitted comments in a number of proceedings. And we commented on the most recent filing, which resulted in the rules for landline cramming. At that time, we urged the FCC to go further and address the problems with cramming on mobile service bills, but I'll defer my comments on that subject for the next panel. We do appreciate the FCC's efforts to move ahead on landline cramming. The rules require telephone companies to notify subscribers at the point of sale on each bill and on their websites if they have the option to block third-party charges from their landline telephone bills. Additionally, the rules strengthen the FCC requirement that third-party charges must be listed separately from the landline provider's charges on phone bills. While we would have liked the FCC to require companies to always let consumers block third-party charges, we welcome the efforts on landline cramming that could potentially help consumers avoid billions of dollars in unwanted charges. Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks for those introductions. So let's move right into the questions. And again, I will try to break them out into 2 large groups. One is just kind of a nuts and bolts of how cramming occurs. Again, that relationship between the carrier that does the billing aggregator they might be working with, and then the content or service provider that sort of initiates the charge in the first place, and how each of those relationships gives us an opportunity maybe to make sure that cramming isn't happening. And then the second set of questions will be more kind of hands-on, best advice that we would give consumers about how to protect themselves. So let's start off with that. Just pose to the panel, how does cramming typically start with a consumer action or not? What is that relationship between the consumer, the carrier, the billing aggregator, and the ultimate provider? How do carriers screen billing aggregators? So that's a lot of questions. So I will turn it over, Malini, if you want to start.
Sure. I'll answer part of your questions.
Yeah.
So the first thing about how the cramming occurs is they're typically a consumer contact. So based on our landline cramming cases and the mobile cramming case that I was just discussing, in many instances we have seen that there is no prior contact with the crammer. A consumer's first experience with the crammer is all of a sudden noticing a charge on their phone bill and then calling the carrier and finding out more about the person or the party who actually placed that charge on their phone bill. In some instances, when consumers receive the charge and talk to their carrier, they do remember receiving texts in the past in the mobile context that might have said something about, for example, the dating tips that are at issue in the Wise Media case. But in many instances, consumers have said that they ignore those texts as spam or they decline services that are offered and they are still charged. Similarly, in the landline cramming context, we have people complain that they've had no contact with the third party, or sometimes consumers have recollected having calls, basic telemarketing calls, where someone's trying to push a product or just describe a product, but the consumer has not taken them up on that offer and they are billed anyway. So in many instances, even if a consumer has done nothing, they end up getting charged.
Okay.
I'd add one thing to that, and that is, from my experience, I've seen that the companies typically or do require some sort of verification, either through a letter of authorization or a third-party voice verification. And particularly with the letter of authorizations, there are a number of companies, some of the bad actors that are out there who use deceptive means to get the consumer to sign on to put their name and signature and essential information onto a piece of paper, such as when you go to the fair and there's some free giveaway offered there. And so in that context, I think it's obviously important that consumers be cautious and aware when they put their name on a piece of paper like that.
Can I ask you a letter of authorization or verification? Who typically is doing that? Is it the service provider that's initiating the charge?
Yeah.
And then does the billing aggregator, and you might touch a little bit on these relationships, is the billing aggregator, before it turns the charge over to the carrier, asking for some proof there?
The way the companies typically arrange it, and so to sort of add on that there's typically a contractual relationship between the telephone company and the aggregator, and then a separate contractual relationship between the billing aggregator and each of the individual service providers, because the service providers are typically too small to arrange for their own bills to be on all the companies, telephone companies around the country. In those contracts that the telephone companies have with the billing aggregators, they require a number of steps for that burdens that be placed on the aggregator, and also requires that aggregator imposes certain burdens on the service provider. So one of those is to make sure that there is some sort of valid authorization. Now, not every one of those valid authorizations are going to be checked every time that the service provider provides a service, but part of the contractual obligations is that the service provider maintain those letters of authorization, that they be auditable, and that both the aggregator and the service provider are subject to penalties from the carrier if it turns out that those authorizations are not appropriately obtained.
And this is actually an issue that Consumer Reports has spoken on a number of times. And we have recognized that the billing aggregators do claim that they have, processes in place to monitor these relationships. But we have long advised consumers to call their phone companies if they notice that they come up with a problem. We feel like that's a better way to get some recourse rather than calling out the individual merchants who may have charged the consumers.
So Corlett, for AARP as well as CU, is it your experience similar to FTC's, the consumers when they complain say, I never had any contact with this service provider? Is that generally been your experience?
There are definitely many instances in which consumers had nothing to do with the initial service and it was out of nowhere. Yes, that is definitely our experience as well.
And I would agree with that as well.
Okay. So, Chris, I'm not sure, did you want to speak at all to sort of the veracity of charges and things that have been done, audits, things like that we can think about to improve?
Yeah, just a couple other things to add there. This authorization that Glenn spoke of, sometimes can be obtained in somewhat sneaky ways. For example, we've known of checks being mailed to businesses, and when you sign the back of the check to cash it, that's authorizing a third party to charge you for one of these services. So sweepstakes, typically if you go to a website for an unsolicited sweepstakes, they may be able to gain your authorization just by signing up to enter into a contest. So just a couple other examples there of ways that this third-party charges can originate, even if the consumer doesn't know that they are. They might say, we had no contact with the vendor, but they actually did.
Yes.
Sure, and I just wanted to add also along those lines that in cases where landline cramming has occurred, we've had court findings that the crammer has had records showing that a consumer purportedly signed up. For example, recorded verification calls on telemarketing pitches. However, at least in one case, a court has found that those calls were doctored. So even if a crammer was calling a small business in that case, for example, and saying, I just want to call you and verify your business information, I'm not selling anything today, and they would get the person's business information, and then they would doctor the call to make it look like the person was agreeing that business was signing up for a service that it hadn't signed up for and was agreeing to third-party charges on its phone bill.
Terrific. Thanks to all of you for your responses to those questions. I think that gives us some sense of kind of how it works. Briefly want to remind the audience that we do have cards for questions if you want to ask any questions. And I'm seeing a set of cards waved in the back, and then also, if you're online, feel free to send your questions into livequestions@fcc.gov, and we'll make sure to get to them as best we can. So moving again to more kind of hands-on consumer advice. Generally, what are the best ways for consumers to protect themselves? We touched on that a little bit already, but and then part of that, and maybe this is most suitable for U.S. Telecom, which of those, if you have a sense of which carriers offer opt-out now, where they can opt out of all third-party charges. We know, as we already touched on, 3 of the largest national carriers have already voluntarily curtailed most third-party billing. So, but for those that haven't, what opt-out options are available for consumers kind of at the front end to prevent cramming from happening in the first place? And then for those that didn't opt out, what are the best ways for consumers to monitor their bills? What are the typical amounts that you've seen? Are they mostly recurring, or are they usually one-off kind of charges? Are there particular issues for consumers that have moved to electronic bills? We know a lot of consumers are going that way. Carriers often encourage consumers to do that. Are there particular hazards there that a consumer should be aware of? And then ultimately, if a consumer is crammed, what's the best way for them to let the carrier know? How can they go about trying to get a refund, if appropriate? What are those necessary steps? Who else should the consumer talk to? Should they try talking to the ultimate service provider that initiated the charge? Should they talk to an aggregator? Whose name typically appears on the bill? And who should the carrier ask to explain their charges? So that's another large set of questions, but I want to turn it over to you. Yeah.
Well, I would just offer, to begin the conversation, a few thoughts. One is we would encourage consumers to determine their usage. If they feel that they engage in certain types of activities using their phones that would necessitate authorizing third-party billing, then they should determine if that's something that fits in to their usage. If they do not expect to engage in any type of activity that would make it easier for them to engage in this third-party billing, they should opt out or take advantage of the blocking of the third-party billing. In the last panel, someone made a analogy to a credit card billing, and to actually treat your phone bill like a credit card bill and scrutinize it to that degree, so you can determine what type of monthly fees are on your bill, and that will help you to determine if something is amiss. If you have a charge in a particular month that's just off, it's not something that typically occurs on your bill. I agree with the Consumers Union staff person who says contact contacting the carrier is the first line of action that they should take, that a consumer should take. But sometimes, in the states in particular, the state consumer advocate's office would probably be a good organization to contact, because they most times have a lot of exposure with the communities, and can sometimes do a really good job of explaining what has happened to the consumer and what the actions they can take to address what has happened.
So we would agree with a lot of these recommendations that are being made. The first step would be to, as you put it, to proactively call your carrier and see what kinds of blocking options there are for third-party charges. Another thing you could do, kind of touching upon what Chris was saying, is be very wary when you see anything about a free prize or a sweepstakes offer or a gift. A lot of things that appear to be free aren't really free, so be very careful about giving out your phone number or any other kind of financial information or something that can be used to make unauthorized charges on your phone bills. After that, if you do suspect that you're a victim of cramming, or even if you don't, you should just get in the habit of reviewing your phone bill. If you have a basic idea of what your monthly charges are, even if that charge goes up by a small amount, you should take a closer look. In some cases, crammers have crammed as small as $2 or $3 charges on people's phone bills. In the Wise Media case that we filed yesterday, the charges are recurring charges of $10 a month. So definitely keep an eye on your phone bill. And in terms of looking at your phone bill, the particular things you want to keep an eye out for are generic sounding names that you were mentioning earlier. In particular, Wise Media used the term alerts. That was part of their billing descriptor, as not descriptive as it was. Other terms that we've seen third parties use are things like minimum usage fees or activation fees or member fees. So definitely keep an eye out for any generic sounding services like that. Another thing is to look at each section of your bill. There are the Wise Media charges appeared under sections called premium services, other service provider charges, and monthly subscriptions. So take a look at anything that says subscriptions or something like that. That all being said, we do understand that reviewing your phone bill can be a complicated task. In Wise Media, in fact, one consumer who complained about a crammed charge pointed out that the charge didn't appear until page 18 of her phone bill. So do review your phone bill, but we understand that another thing that needs to be done is that we need to take law enforcement action against crammers and think about other solutions in this area as well. If you do see a suspicious charge, or if you're unsure about a charge, call your carrier and ask about it. If you didn't authorize it, ask to have it removed, and ask if you've received prior charges from this company, and ask about removing those as well, because many cramming charges are recurring monthly charges on your phone bill. Also, at that point, see what you can do to block charges from that party. Another thing we encourage you to do is to complain to the FTC, the FCC, your state. It's very important to complain. The FTC keeps a complaint database, and we look at it very closely to determine what law enforcement actions to bring. Another thing that I think Mark was asking about is whether it makes sense to complain to your carrier or to the crammer itself, the third party itself that was putting the charge on your phone bill. I'll just note that in the Wise Media case, again, many consumers didn't have prior contact with a third party, so it was very difficult to obtain contact information for the third party itself. Some consumers were able to obtain some information when they called their carriers, but when they tried to follow up with Wise Media, they were instead routed to a third party that Wise Media was contracting with, and the third party didn't really know anything about the charges, how they'd been placed on the phone. They didn't know anything about refunds. They refused to provide Wise Media's information, and even in the few instances where they did offer refunds, they didn't actually provide the refunds. So they promised consumers that a refund was coming, and it never came. So an important step would be to complain to your carrier, and then, of course, let the FTC, FCC, your state know what happened.
Thanks. So we have 5 minutes left. All great information, but yeah, by all means,
very quickly,
I want the three of you to be able to chime in. Yeah.
Okay, so I'm just going to speak now because we are in total agreement with everything that you just said. That was a great overview, but I should also mention that not only is it important to check for unfamiliar charges that you don't understand, but also check the amount that you've been charged. So consumers may well authorize a charge, but the amount could be wrong. So make sure you check the amount as well. And we've also seen charges as low as, I believe, $199. So very much in line with what you said.
Okay.
Yeah, actually, if I can, we agree with absolutely everything that I think I just heard, and I want to emphasize that all of the carriers that I'm aware of that offer third-party billing have pretty much adopted a no questions asked policy, where if you call up your carrier and say, I did not authorize this charge, they will take that charge off the bill then and there. You will not have to pay for it, and they will take the lead in contacting the service provider and figure out what was going on. So, and I would add to that consumers should be aware that their telephone service can never be discontinued for the failure to pay a non-telephone related charge. Not a charge not related to their specific telephone service. A couple other things that the companies I think are doing in this area that I think are important. As you mentioned, Mark, the companies have significantly constrained recently the types of services that they will allow to appear on their bill. By and large, for historical reasons, there was a fairly broad category of services that were allowed to get on bills. But the companies have made the decision that to protect their customers and based on consumer expectations that they will no longer provide third-party billing for services that would not be expected and are not traditionally related to their basic wireline service. So that I think makes it easier for folks to figure out where these services are coming and allows the carriers themselves to enforce their policies. Also, consistent with the FCC's recent action, the companies are continually tweaking their bills to try to make them more transparent, more understandable. I think one of the things that the Commission did recently is make sure that anytime there's a new service that appears on a customer's bill, that has to be highlighted right up front. So folks can look up front and say, wow, I don't know what that is. It's the first time I've appeared on this service. Call your carrier. Not only will your carrier take care of that charge, but ask them to go through your most recent last several months of bills and see if those charges have appeared on previous bills that somehow you missed, and they will take those off as well.
Terrific. Chris?
Yeah, just wanted to add, we definitely have seen a change in at least the largest carriers in their practices on third-party billing. They're no longer billing for enhanced voicemail and things of that nature. They still support third-party billing from traditional voice technologies like long-distance carriers. And so we've actually noticed that a few of the traditional crammers have maybe shifted their behaviors to now offering more enhanced long-distance services and things like that. That the big carriers will still bill on a third-party bill for. So it's something to keep vigilant on.
So we do have a couple of audience questions. They really go more to wireless-specific issues, so I'm going to hold those for the next panel. But really want to thank all of you both for explaining kind of how it all starts and happens and giving some great consumer tips. You put a lot of information to a small panel. You might say you crammed a lot of information into a small amount of time. So with that, I want to thank each of you for your time.
Thanks, Mark.
Thank you.
All right, we'll take another 10-minute break, and the panel 3, please come up. By the way, thank you all. We're amazingly on schedule. Amazingly.
All right. Thanks, everyone, and welcome to our second panel on cramming. This one will focus more on wireless. We did touch a little bit on wireless cramming in the earlier panel, but this one will focus more on it and some of the unique issues for wireless cramming. So just to kick it off, and just as a bit of a reminder, The Commission in April 2012 adopted new rules to protect landline consumers from cramming. Although it chose at that time to not adopt the same rules for mobile carriers because it found that cramming for mobile services wasn't as large a problem as cramming for landline, it did note a trend. The Commission stated that, quote, cramming appears to be less a problem for CMRS consumers than for wireline consumers, but it may be on the rise. Among other things, the Commission asked if there are technological solutions that might help consumers, such as apps for mobile phones, that would help combat mobile cramming. And the Commission asked whether it should adopt additional cramming protections for CMRS. So now we'd like to talk with industry representatives, consumer groups, the FTC, and state regulatory interests about these issues, what protections the carriers already have in place to prevent cramming, and where we go from here. So with that in mind, we'd like to turn it over, as we did in the last panel, and ask our set of panelists, welcome, thank you. And thanks for everyone in the audience for being here. To briefly introduce, with a 3-minute limit, to themselves. This is a fairly large panel, and we even have someone who's on the phone who's joining us that we don't want to forget. So I'll start off from those closest to me and moving away farthest. But welcome, and again, if you could give us a brief introduction, that would be great. So, Jim?
Great. My name is Jim Chilson. I'm Director of Communications for the Citizens Utility Board, or CUB, in Illinois. CUB is a nonprofit consumer watchdog group that has spent the last 3 decades battling for better telecom policy in Illinois. In fact, just last year, Governor Pat Quinn used CUB's headquarters to sign one of the nation's toughest laws against landline cramming. It's a bill that was championed by Attorney General Lisa Madigan, and it followed in the footsteps of our friends in Vermont. But the experience that we have had at hundreds of phone bill clinics across the state of Illinois, and through our own research, suggests to us that cramming, that scam artists have now their sights set on cell phone bills. In fact, we call cell phone bills the new frontier for fraud. I have been crammed. I don't know if I should be proud of that or ashamed. One of our top attorneys, Christy, was actually crammed with a $9.99, and I should add she's happily married. And she was crammed with a $9.99 some type of dating text service called Love Genie. We give her a hard time about that, and it's actually offered by Wise Media. So I just called her and told her about that. But we laugh about that, but this is a serious topic. I do think that it's encouraging to see that what the wireless industry has done to combat cramming, the actions that it has taken. But I do think that we are heading towards some type of stronger regulations or tougher regulations, and even including some type of block on third-party charges with reasonable and common sense exceptions. I think that moving beyond self-regulation is vital to not only protecting consumers, but it's vital to the health of a growing wireless economy, and I think it's vital to the credibility of the cell phone industry. Thank you.
Thanks. Laura?
Very pleased to be here to speak on the third and final panel of the day. I'm Delara Derkshani. I serve as Policy Counsel for Consumers Union, the advocacy and policy arm of Consumer Reports. As I mentioned on our earlier panel, our organization has been involved in the issue of cramming for a number of years. Last year's landline cramming rules were a welcome first step, but we were disappointed to see that the protections did not extend beyond landline customers to wireless and VoIP users. These protections are especially important in light of the recent consumer shift away from landline services to wireless technology. In fact, as Consumer Reports has noted, there are now at least 3 times as many cell phone users as landline users, which we believe further reaffirms the need for important wireless cramming protections. According to an FTC survey, only 1 in 20 cramming victims may be aware of unauthorized charges because consumers don't know to look for them. As we discussed on the previous panel, many of these bills have small unauthorized charges with unfamiliar names or codes, making them more difficult to detect. We consider this a serious problem for wireless consumers, and as a result, Consumer Reports has been alerting readers to the practice of wireless cramming and has advised them to be extra vigilant in reviewing their mobile bills for unexplained fees. Unfortunately, existing truth in billing protections for wireless services do not solve the problem of cramming. They merely help consumers, if at all, identify cramming after it has already occurred. Therefore, we believe that more proactive measures are needed to prevent unauthorized charges from appearing on bills in the first place. We will continue to work to ensure that all consumers are protected against cramming, and we will give a special focus as well to make sure that communities of color are also protected, as these communities are especially vulnerable given their higher rates of cell phone usage. Thank you.
Thanks. Craig?
Thank you, Mark. I'm Craig Graciano. I chair the Consumer Protection Committee for the National Association of State Utility Consumer Advocates. We've filed quite a few comments in this and predecessor dockets, and we're delighted to be here. I'd like to highlight 3 points, if I can fit them into 3 minutes. First, as we consider wireless cramming, I think we'll do well to remember our learning about wireline cramming. The fundamental problem is the same in both cases. Cramming is classic consumer fraud, trying to get somebody to pay for something they haven't in fact bought. At NASUCA, we support solutions for all modes of service, solutions that will stand the test of time in an environment in which technology changes, but human conduct does not. Second, in terms of what the industry should do, we've tried to focus attention on what I would suggest is the core problem, the need for adequate authentication processes. As observed by the Senate Commerce Committee, phone bills have become a method of payment akin to debit and credit cards, but without the protections. There's a booklet put out by the payment card industry summarizing the many points of vulnerability and all that needs to be done in order to establish what the Senate Commerce Committee calls a reliable method of payment that customers and businesses can use to conduct legitimate commerce. Among the many requirements is the use of a PIN number or its equivalent. I know PIN numbers won't stop every fraud, but that doesn't mean they aren't an essential piece of the solution. I know there's a necessary cost-benefit analysis, but it's already been done in the payment card industry. Third, in terms of what government might do, state and federal, we support a number of solutions. Our most recent comments especially support an explicit FCC rule prohibiting cramming together with appropriate enforcement activity. It's not a big step for the Commission, which has already determined that cramming violates Section 201B and has already brought some enforcement actions. This solution is congruent with the problem. It would not disable any legitimate commerce or activity. It would supply a needed public accountability. It would provide the impetus for the telecommunications industry to do what the payment card industry has done. It would provide needed protection for consumers. Thank you.
Thanks, Craig. Mike?
Thank you, and again, thank you to the FCC for sponsoring today's program. First, let me just comment on the FTC's action today. Nobody supports cramming. This is fraudulent criminal activity. It's the same as robbing a bank or putting false charges on a credit card. And we're very supportive of the Federal Trade Commission's action to go after those who break the law here. And I'm very pleased to note that the Federal Trade Commission's statement has recognized the cooperation of carriers in their investigation and bringing today's action, and also noted that at least some carriers have already shut down WISE and the offending codes. Let's see if we have a couple of slides here to quickly address the question that the Commission has asked in the further notice of proposed rulemaking about trends. The FCC has not reported specific cramming complaints since 2002, which means that the number of complaints are below the threshold requirements of the top 5 categories included in the quarterly complaint reports. But both the July 2011 NPRM and the April 2012 further notice in this proceeding actually provide some aggregate numbers about cramming. And what we see from those numbers, in paragraph 21 of the further notice, the FCC reports that they received approximately 510 wireless cramming complaints an entire year, which is comparable to the approximately 509 cramming complaints received in 2009. What we have as a slide here indicates the number of billing complaints, wireless billing complaints, which is a broader category than just cramming, going down based on the quarterly reports as the number of wireless subscribers has increased. Similarly, you heard the Federal Trade Commission has a Sentinel report. They just issued or published the 2002 numbers last month. They too show very similar numbers, a little bit more than the FCC, 711 complaints from Better Business Bureaus, state AGs, and state consumer advocates. And finally, in this docket in January, the California PUC also provided information about the number of complaints that they've received. They received 111 wireless cramming complaints in 2009 and 95 complaints in 2010. So the trend here shows that the numbers are going down. And frankly, that's consistent with the industry's best practices and monitoring activities, which do require double opt-in and do require audits every month of every code for compliance with these best practices. We have a little graph here. We don't have time to go into the details now on the double opt-in process from both the web and the phone. I want to call attention to this slide, which shows a reason why the trends are down. This is the 2 years since CTA, on behalf of the industry, started third-party monitoring of the industry best practices and message flows and media advertising of premium messages. You can see the very first month, pretty much there was a problem with every audited shortcode. We audit every shortcode, premium shortcode, every month. A lot of these were very minor. Capital letters were not included. Dollar signs or cent signs weren't included. But within 2 years, you can see that we now are close to 98% compliance with the industry best practices the consumer groups have approved. And then very quickly, we use 2 different firms for auditing, and we have the representatives here to answer questions about what they actually do. Aegis Mobile, on behalf of CTA, investigates all prospective premium common shortcode lessees to confirm their identity in advance of the firm receiving a common shortcode. So we want to know who we're doing business with and that they're legitimate businesses. Once a code has been assigned, WMC monitors the media and the message flows, the double opt-in, the amount of the subscription, the fact that the program matches what the applicant has put in the registry. If it's a horoscope, it should be a horoscope and not something else, and complies with the content guidelines and acceptable use practices the industry has adopted and published. So again, thank you, and we have, as I said, the experts here.
Thank you, and with Mike are Anna Hinnensgaard with WMC Global and Greg Van Allen of Aegis Mobile to support. Thank you for being here. Malini from the FTC, welcome back.
So since I already introduced myself. I'll keep this one brief. I am Malini Mithal with the Federal Trade Commission. I'm in the Division of Financial Practices in our Consumer Protection Bureau, and I am very interested in cramming issues. Our agency has brought a lot of law enforcement in the area of cramming. We brought our first mobile cramming action yesterday and apparently protected a panelist's wife by doing that, so that's very exciting. And we also are interested in policy recommendations in this area. We have filed a comment with the FCC in this rulemaking where we have recommended certain approaches to rulemaking in the wireless cramming area. And we are also interested in examining other potential approaches, both at the workshop today and at our own workshop on May 8th.
Thank you. And then we have a final panelist who's joining us by phone, Kate Welly-McCabe, from the who's the Vermont Assistant Attorney General. Are you there, Kate? So what we'll do is move right into the questions, because I'm not getting any sign that she's connected yet. So we'll wait for her to join up when she can. One more time. Kate, are you there? Okay. Of course. So while we're awaiting her, and in recognition that we have limited time and a lot of great voices on this panel that we don't want to cut short, want to dive in with our first set of questions, where we explore what really lay the foundation.
Okay, go ahead.
What is Kate
Hi,
there?
Mark. Are you able to hear me?
Oh, terrific. How you doing, Kate?
Great, thanks.
Glad you could join us. Could you just briefly introduce yourself? We can hear you well here in the room. Just briefly introduce yourself. That would be terrific.
Great, thanks. My name is Kate Welly-McCabe. I am an Assistant Attorney General with the Vermont Attorney General's Office. I'm in my 4th year of service here at the AGO, and I handle mobile telecom enforcement for our consumer protection unit here. I wanted to thank the Commission for accommodating my inability to travel to D.C. today and allowing me to participate from the comfort of my own office. Since time is limited, I just wanted to give everyone my top takeaway. That is the one thing I'd like you to take away from my participation here today, and that is that the magnitude of the mobile cramming problem, which I've been studying for 2 years now, is widely underestimated, especially by folks that rely mainly or only on complaint data to describe the problem. Complaints really are, in this instance, as in many consumer protection instances, really just the tip of the iceberg. And let me give you an example to substantiate my claim. The Vermont Attorney General's Office, through its Consumer Assistance Program, has only gotten about 25 to 30 complaints about mobile cramming since 2006, which, as far as we can tell, is about when third-party charges started to hit consumers' mobile phone bills. However, in the last couple of years, I and my office have reached out and communicated with nearly 1,000 Vermont consumers who have had third-party charges placed on their mobile phone bills. And here's what we've concluded from speaking with them. More than half of third-party charges that are placed on Vermont consumers' phone bills are unauthorized, that is to say, crammed. More than half of the consumers in Vermont who have had third-party charges on their mobile phone bills did not know the charge was there until we asked them to look at their phone bills. And third and finally, more than half of the Vermont consumers that had third-party charges on their phone bills didn't even know it was possible for a third party to charge them for goods and services in that manner. So if I drop off or if you're unable to hear me for the rest of this panel discussion, I just wanted that to be my 2 cents to you, that it's time for law enforcement and consumer protection folk and industry folk to really focus on this problem. It is, as someone said prior to me, the new frontier for fraud. Thanks.
Thanks, Kate. Glad you were able to join us, and thanks for everybody's introductory remarks. So let's jump right in. Basically, I want to break up the set of questions into a couple of large chunks, the first being just exploring the extent of wireless cramming. We've heard in introductory remarks some discussion of statistics. I want to talk a little bit about that. And then secondly, move on to some questions about the key differences between wireless and wireline cramming. And then third, discuss the current safeguards that are in place to prevent cramming, things like charge blocking, prior consumer consent. We hear a lot about double opt-in as well. So that's an ambitious set of questions with the time we have, but so let's get going. Mike from CTIA presented some statistics in his introductory remarks. Invite others to discuss and help us lay the groundwork for the scope of wireless cramming. The FCC previously noted that mobile cramming is on the rise. From everyone's perspective on the panel, is that correct, either in terms of absolute numbers or as a fraction of all cramming? If there is a trend to toward increased cramming on mobile phones, does the trend towards cord cutting explain that, or are there other characteristics that are unique to mobile phones and that service that would also explain an increase in mobile cramming? So that's a pretty broad set of questions, but I invite everyone to kind of chime in and help us lay the groundwork for how big a problem this is for consumers.
Well, one thing I would add is that the Citizens Utility Board, in working with the wireless research firm Validas, did release a report this past December, and the findings are eerily similar to what Ms. McCabe had talked about. Is that we found that the number of suspicious charges on cell phone bills had nearly doubled from one year to the next, and that in the second year of the 1,000 or so lines, it's roughly 1,000 lines that had third-party charges, more than half had suspicious charges. So that is what sparked us to say that we fear that cell phone bills are the new frontier for fraud.
I'd like to second that. I'd like to second what the state of Vermont had to say. We heard at the very beginning of this workshop that bill shock is a very obvious problem that people know about, but that cramming is a hidden problem, and we've seen that time after time after time. And if you're going to rely on the number of complaints that you get to estimate the scope of the problem, you're going to make a very big error. And perhaps the best illustration of that was the wireline case that the Federal Trade Commission brought against Inc. 21, where the court found that 95% of the people who had received the charges were not even aware that the charges were there.
Okay. 2 points to make. First, again, the California Public Utility Commission ex parte filed in January shows that the number of customers and the amount of refunds reported by wireless carriers has dropped by 50% during the same 2-year period that we showed industry monitoring going from a start to almost 98% compliance. So there, the trend, as reported by California, not of what complaints were reported to them, but what carriers reported to them under a state law, showed a dramatic reduction, and that's in the record, not by us, but by the California Commission. Second, I couldn't disagree more strongly with the suggestion that consumers don't make complaints to the FCC and other reporting agencies. The very same quarterly complaint reports that the FCC issues for wireless in the 4 years between 2008 and 2011, when the FCC reported about 1,760 wireless cramming reports, reported over 234,000 TCPA complaints. That's more than 130 times more consumer complaints about spam and unsolicited messages. And consumers certainly took the time to call the FCC call center and email and make those complaints. They haven't taken the time to complain about cramming or billing, as we see from the FCC complaint information.
So we have seen thousands of cramming complaints. We certainly have seen a number of complaints, but we agree that these complaints are likely underreported. Many consumers pay their phone bills in full. A lot of consumers take advantage of automatic bill pay services and don't do a line-by-line review of their bill, so they're not even aware that they're a victim of cramming. In fact, when consumers finally do call and complain about cram charges, then they go back to their bills from months before and say, oh, look, I was crammed in previous months as well. So consumers really aren't aware that these charges are being placed on their phone bills. Another issue, as another panelist pointed out, in Inc. 21, the landline cramming case that you were referring to, when we started that case, we had many complaints. We did not have that 95% of the consumers didn't even know about these charges. We only found that out through court discovery and a survey. So by the end of the case, we knew that 95 consumers were not even aware that these charges were on their bills, and 97% of consumers had not authorized them. So we certainly found in that case that the complaints we saw were the tip of the iceberg, just to repeat a phrase that Kate had used. So certainly we're worried that even though we've seen thousands of complaints, which is a high number, that there are many, many more that haven't been reported. We're also concerned that this is a problem that's going to be on the rise, given that consumers have more and more mobile phones, are using mobile phones to make payments, and we think that's going to continue. We've also heard about mobile security threats that are associated with the growth in mobile app downloading and usage. There have been cases where security vulnerabilities in mobile apps enabled mobile cramming. And I think Senator Rockefeller and a number of consumer advocates have raised concerns, and we agree that efforts to reduce landline cramming may cause crammers to migrate to the mobile billing platforms. So these are all serious concerns, and we do think this is a problem that's underreported and on the rise.
Thank you. Yes.
We at Consumers Union fully agree with just about everything that you just said. I will add there are other unique aspects that further make the wireless cramming issue even more important. One would be the whole text spamming issue. Crammers, all they need often to cram is a consumer's active cell phone number. That's enough to make an unauthorized charge appear on a cell phone bill. So they can do this by sending a text to a consumer's cell phone number and confirming that the number actually exists. So that's just one more issue that is further complicated in the wireless realm. But we fully agree with everything that the FTC just said as well.
Thank you. Kate, did you have anything more to add?
I really don't. I've heard a lot of things that I agree with wholeheartedly, and I did want to point out, though, that one of the reasons that this kind of fraud is likely underreported is, as the point has been made, that folks aren't noticing it. Whereas in other types of telecom issues, such as unsolicited calls or unsolicited text messages, people recognize when they're called, by a robot during dinner or when they're about to go to sleep. And those kinds of issues have been very well publicized, and special mechanisms have been set up for people to give the government and the industry feedback in those cases. So I think that comparison isn't well taken.
Thanks. So let's move on to our next set of questions. We've touched on this a little bit, but maybe explore a little bit more the unique causes of mobile cramming versus landline. Someone mentioned SMS spam already. We also see a lot about so-called premium services. So if the panelists could talk a little bit about those and how that might drive mobile cramming. We think it's also important to note that maybe a little bit distinct from landline third-party billing, there's some uses of mobile third-party billing that most of us would agree are probably good uses. For example, donations to charities and things like that. When we're thinking about tackling the problem of mobile cramming, how do we make sure that we preserve those services? And then also, we've mentioned a little bit, but maybe explore a little bit more the increasing popularity of mobile payments, and are there unique aspects of that could potentially drive increased cramming? So with that,
well, I'm happy to dive in here. There are a lot of very good and innovative uses of premium SMS. You mentioned charitable giving. American Red Cross and others have been using this channel for disaster relief giving. Just last year, the Federal Elections Commission authorized candidates for federal office to use premium SMS for campaign contributions, and both the Obama and Romney campaigns turned to it. Many states now are revising their campaign finance laws to similarly permit this. We've seen innovative uses that allow prison inmates who can only make collect calls to make calls to their family and loved ones who don't have wireline phones, which can accept collect calls. And of course, there's a lot of content, and some of the content is perhaps more worthy than others. Some of us are very fond of a Major League Baseball premium short code that provides alerts and scores both for actual teams and fantasy teams. There are horoscopes and dating and so on. Just when you go to a newsstand, there turns out to be a lot of magazines about dating and romance and Hollywood and horoscopes for every one issue of Foreign Affairs on a newsstand. I don't think we should be judgmental if there's a market and interest in purchasing and subscribing to this kind of information.
Please.
Go ahead.
Sure.
Yeah, go ahead.
Okay.
It's a very considerate panel.
It's because we're on the same side. Okay, so we at Consumers Union recognize that there are very many valuable uses of these third-party services, and by no means do we want to preclude consumers' use of them. But I think that a good rule will figure out how to distinguish, these unauthorized charges that consumers have no idea about versus services that they actually want. I think that's the question moving forward, is how do we achieve that?
Yeah, I get. I wish we could change the parameters of the discussion, because I just want to make the point. Healthy commerce and consumer protections are not mutually exclusive. I think that having strong consumer protections enhances commerce because it weeds out bad players. So, wish we could get on the same page about that.
Okay, I think that's right.
Mark, this is Kate. May I jump in?
Yeah, could you speak just a little louder, Kate? But yes,
sure.
by all means.
I think an excellent point was made a couple of speakers ago, and that is that while there are certainly some laudable uses for third-party charges on cell phone bills, that we need to be drawing some lines that separate those uses from the areas in which fraud is taking place. And I'll tell you what I've seen. And that might help draw some lines. What I've seen is that when consumers complain or when they're contacted and asked about their third-party charge experience and have had a negative experience, the overwhelming majority of those consumers are arguing about $9.99 per month recurring subscription-type charges, mostly alerts, and mostly through a platform called PSMS, which is what you've been referring to, Mark, when you say premium text messaging service. So there, if we keep seeing those kinds of patterns, that we might be able to start drawing some of those lines.
Thanks, Kate. And we've gotten some great questions from the audience, and I want to pause to ask one of those now because it seems like a good time. Can any of the panelists comment on how large the general third-party service provider market is, and then more specifically, what percentage or number of third-party service providers are the text-to-donate type folks? So a way of recasting that maybe is what fraction of the third-party charges are to these sort of for these sort of purposes that we all would agree are good, charitable donations, disaster relief, and things like that. So would invite some thoughts on that.
Well, it's complicated, like the movie headline. Premium SMS short codes, I think, are about 20% of all of the short codes being used. So 80% are standard rate. They're charged to the customer based on the customer's arrangement with the carrier for buckets, unlimited, whatever. With respect to charitable giving, some of the charities have their own unique dedicated codes. which we think is a best practice. For example, the American Red Cross has its own unique code. Other charities share codes and go through a form of aggregator. These charitable aggregators can have hundreds of charities all sharing a common code using unique keywords to differentiate the charities they're supporting.
Great. Any other thoughts on that question? Okay. If not, then what I'd like to move to are more kind of the hands-on consumer protections that are in place. As we've mentioned at the outset, our understanding at the FCC is that some wireless providers might already provide consumers the option to opt out of all third-party charges at point of sale. So want to, number one, ask whether that's in fact correct, and number two, whether the consumer advocate folks on the panel or other regulatory partners would encourage consumers to look into that and avail themselves of that option. Again, with the caveat we mentioned before, there may well be uses of third-party billing we all agree are good ones. We also hear a lot about double opt-in and double opt-in. Would like to hear your thoughts on that, how effective, to the extent it's in place, how effective that's proven for consumers. We've certainly heard on the one hand carriers saying that's a great safeguard. On the other hand, as we've heard today, there nevertheless remains complaints and concerns. So how effective that is for folks. And then moving to, if a consumer is crammed, a mobile consumer is crammed, how would you suggest they go about getting a refund? We have heard before of a one-and-done policy where all a consumer need do is call the carrier and then it's done, over with. Would like to explore whether that seems to be the case or whether maybe that's not the entire story. So again, that's a lot of questions, and I want to turn it over to you all.
I would just add that when I was doing research for the campaign we did in December, when we released the analysis, I went to each of the carrier websites and tried to find out which ones, if any, did block third-party charges. We've heard that they do. I haven't seen any companies that were specifically noted. And I have to say it was difficult to find out who did and who did not. So I'd love to be enlightened about that. But I think that that's one of your first steps, is to call your carrier and see what they can do. When I was crammed, I will say I found the carrier, after noting it after a few months, and once I did see it, I called up the carrier and I found my carrier to be very helpful. So I think that should be one of these steps that you do. I think also there are, the way the climate is right now, you have to be your own best advocate. We'd like a little more help with some of the regulations, but I think there are websites like to help with to identify possibly fraudulent texts. SMSwatchdog.com is one of them that I found very helpful in trying to figure out what the texting service was that I received. But I also think that protecting your cell phone number with adding it to the do not call list is helpful, and to always beware, obviously, of any online contests going anywhere that asks you to give your cell phone number, or even to join a sweepstakes, or even to get a free recipe that has you fill out a form or something. Somehow a scammer could use that as saying, well, you gave your okay to get this charge.
I don't think the record is in these proceedings is really very clear as to what exactly double opt-in is, or when it applies, or who uses it, or whether people are required to use it. We do know, as Mark said, that a lot of these complaints are coming in from people who get unwanted text messages, and they end up with charges. Whether or not they ignore the text message, they get a charge. They write back, no, I don't want that, or stop, I don't want that, and they still get a charge. And I don't think that this double opt-in is serving as any kind of deterrent at all in that kind of a situation. And I think some further investigation needs to be done along those lines, so that we do end up with authentication processes that actually do authenticate, and in that way separate the legitimate commerce and activities from the illegitimate.
I think that's a great point. I mean, double opt-in works great if you're an honest third party, but if you're not, it's not a very good deterrent.
think Anna will speak to the way the industry monitors double opt-in, but I wanted to quickly answer a couple of your questions, Mark. CTI has confirmed from the major carriers, as Chris Gutman-McCabe mentioned in the earlier panel, serve the overwhelming majority of wireless customers, that they all do offer third-party charge blocking upon a customer's request and disclose it. However, there are other companies we are not aware, I'll do this as a double negative being a lawyer, we're not aware of any carrier that does not offer it, but we haven't confirmed with a couple of hundred carriers in the United States that they all do. We have confirmed it with the major carriers. Second, the major carriers have all adopted the one-and-done policy so that if a customer has
I'm sorry, all major carriers?
All the major wireless carriers.
Okay.
So any wireless customer who wants to question a charge on their carrier bill, they should call their carrier's customer service representative, and that customer service representative is empowered to remove the charge, and there will be no referral to the content provider or bouncing back and forth. Moreover, the carriers monitor often, I think typically on a daily basis, the complaints they're receiving associated with specific shortcodes. And if they detect cramming going on, carriers will affirmatively identify the other customers who had been subscribed to that shortcode and proactively remove the charges before customers even call to complain. And again, I think that the CPUC ex parte filing in January in this docket demonstrates how proactive the carriers are in removing charges that they discover before customers discover it. And if there is interest in the double opt-in process and how it's monitored, Anna is our expert.
Sure, and I'd be happy to talk a little bit about that. So for premium SMS, there is a double opt-in required before charges can be recorded on the bill. That involves all of the major disclosures, pricing, subscription, description of the content that will be received. The user has to positively affirm acceptance of those terms 2 times, usually through entering their phone number on a website. They receive an SMS and they need to respond affirmatively to that SMS or put a PIN number back into the website to receive the mobile content and the
just so I understand, is the verification done through the third-party provider? There's the consumer's not verifying to the billing aggregator or the carrier itself, right?
That varies from carrier to carrier.
Okay.
And that's actually an evolving story.
Okay.
Yes.
We'll stay tuned.
Stay tuned.
The other thing I'd like to add is for that rebilling to occur every month, the customer needs to be notified before the subscription billing happens and again after it happens. So there should be multiple touch points between the program and the consumer ongoing on a month-to-month basis with the pricing disclosure and opt-out information, so that stop keyword.
Okay.
I could also just add that other helpful measures that some carriers may be taking right now is by taking a look at some of the revenue spikes that could be coming through on the short codes and doing an analysis on the refunds. And if you see increases in refunds, then you can then focus search efforts on particular content providers and short codes and identify some fraudulent or misbehaving activity.
Okay, and despite the double opt-in practice, we have seen thousands of complaints, as we've talked about on this panel, where consumers have been crammed and they never even heard of the crammer, much less opted in twice for supposed services. So this is a concern. Also, in the Wise Media case, as I think Mike was mentioning in his opening remarks, there is evidence that the carriers did provide refunds. Wise Media's charges were refunded 30 to 40% in some months. So that means a third of Wise Media charges were refunded by the carriers, and in fact 2 carriers cut off Wise Media from further billing on its network. Now, other consumers complained that they had difficulty obtaining refunds. So the response to refund requests and complaints has not been consistent, and we would advocate and have advocated for clear and consistent dispute resolution and reimbursement policies for consumers. Another measure that we think needs to be in place is that all carriers should offer a block of third-party charges, and they should disclose it to consumers. I know it's been mentioned that this is disclosed. It should be disclosed clearly and conspicuously so consumers actually know about it. Another measure, or other measures, have been talked about or have been discussed, and we would love to explore these further in the couple of minutes we have left today and at our workshop as well. But others, I think, I can't remember which groups have advocated for things like standardized billing descriptions, notifying customers of recurring charges in advance, contractually requiring aggregators and content providers to maintain records so that if there is a dispute, it can be resolved efficiently. So there are a number of other measures that could be taken to combat the cramming issues that we've been talking about.
Terrific. Kate or Delar would invite you if you have any additional
I
points.
don't think I have anything additional to add. I think everything was covered already.
Okay. Kate, anything more on this topic?
I just wanted to add to what Malini just said, that we too are seeing complaints and hearing testimonials from consumers about having been crammed all during the tenure of the double opt-in, which is a concern for us as well. And I wanted to echo Malini's observation that consumers are having an inconsistent experience getting refunds back from their carriers. Some consumers have a very positive experience and are able to get a full refund the first time they call. Some consumers can get a partial refund only, and some consumers are still being referred to third-party service providers, and they're generally not successful getting substantial amounts of money back from the service providers. In fact, many times they are unable to reach a human, unable to reach a human who speaks English, or are promised a refund that never comes in the mail.
Thanks. So with the 3 or 4 minutes that we have left, we've gotten some great audience questions, and we really appreciate that, and I apologize we won't get to all of them, but I wanted to ask one for sure that seems sort of very hands-on consumer question. So when looking at these statistics that people are seeing suspicious charges, how much do you think is due to family plans where the account holder may not be aware of authorized charges done by another member of the plan? And I got to say, as a father, I'm really interested in the answer to this question.
Well, anecdotally, that is, let's say, a teachable moment in many families. Certainly, most consumers find family plans a very attractive way of subscribing to wireless service. So you'll have husbands, wives, and children all on the same account. And they're often, and unlike credit cards, most teenagers don't have their own credit card or bank account. They do have a phone, often a smartphone, which enables the premium charges and opting in. So again, anecdotally, an awful lot of this is driven by members of the family making, shall we say, maybe not wise choices, but definitely being notified and opting in to these programs.
I'll just add, as a dad, I can identify with that, with what you're saying. But the example I gave earlier with with one of our top attorneys who had the Love Genie Tips line that she was paying for, it was her and her mom on a family plan, and they both had no recollection of ever doing anything to sign up for Love Genie Tips. So I think it is happening on family plans, but in this case, anecdotally, people didn't have any recollection of doing anything like that.
I think it'd be very, very difficult to put a precise number on that, but I think very clearly, and this is another place where our landline experience gives us some clues too. In the past, we saw all kinds of cases involving collect calls where the companies would say, there's no way that this collect call could have been billed to you unless you pressed 1 on your keypad and accepted this collect call, and when the investigation was done, it was clear that the thing was totally unauthorized. There's some of that going on, too, in wireless.
Okay. We got 45 seconds. I'm going to try to to get one more question in from the audience. Is there a way to provide a consumer with a 4-digit PIN number to their wireless accounts that would accompany any authorization of third-party charges?
We've advocated for this in the past. We think it would be a minor inconvenience. That's about the extent I'm willing to talk about that right now. So.
I'm getting a smile from CTIA. I'm not sure what that means.
Well, it would certainly be possible to implement that. I think it would be need to be integrated into the existing platforms.
Okay.
There is a pretty robust infrastructure around the SMS systems that stands totally separately from your peer-to-peer communications going on over the regular wireless network. So I personally would probably forget my PIN as soon as I set it, but that is a solution that could work.
Great. Well, our time's winding down, and I just want to say again, thanks so much to all of our panelists and the great audience questions. Much appreciated. Kate, thanks for joining us remotely. Appreciate your input as well.
Thanks again for having me, Mark.
My pleasure. So thanks, everybody. Good panel.
Just on behalf of the Commission and the Consumer and Governmental Affairs Bureau, I want to thank all of the panelists, as Mark did and earlier Michael did, for sharing your time and your expertise with us. This has been a great discussion, a lively discussion. We've gathered lots of good information that will help us inform both our policy making and our consumer education efforts. I also would be remiss in not thanking the CGB staff from our Consumer Affairs and Outreach Division and our Policy Division for helping to put together today's workshop. And thank you to the consumers who came and listened and shared their questions. As I mentioned, bottom line, everything we do is about consumers at the FCC, and we certainly appreciate their making the effort to get here. While we have a good crowd in this room, I want to assure you that we have a very sizable crowd online. Almost 350 folks logged in to listen and submitted their questions via online, so that's great. We welcome your feedback on what we can do going forward on the two issues that we've discussed today and how we might be able to sponsor further workshops on consumer issues that would help benefit not only the FCC but the greater public. So thanks again. We really appreciate you spending the morning with us.